Saturday morning was supposed to be boring coffee in one hand, phone in the other, pajama pants I would deny owning if you asked. Then the doorbell lit up, and somebody started hammering like they were mad at the wood. And there she was, through the peephole. Darla Quinn, our HOA president, chin up like she owned the street, telling me, "Cal, Mason, you've got 2 hours to vacate. VIP guests need access to your home." And I actually laughed because sometimes your brain needs a pressure release when the world goes sideways. But I caught it in my peripheral, the side gate I always lock, sitting a hair open. Fresh tracks carved through my flower bed, like a dolly or a tripod, got rolled in, and a glossy business card tucked in the back door. Horizon Redevelopment Group, transforming communities, unlocking potential. It smelled like money and a promise you shouldn't believe. I held up the card and told Darla someone had been in my yard. She went pale, then did the one thing bullies love to do when the ground shifts, called 911 on me, on my own porch voice, all syrup. "Officer, a resident is obstructing a lawful assessment." And she snapped her folder open like it was the Constitution, telling me she had emergency authority to relocate residents for the good of Juniper Ridge, and I said calm as I could, "Darla, I live here. My toothbrush is 10 steps behind me. I'm not handing you my house for a couple hours because a mystery guest wants to poke around." And she gave me that smug 15-minute countdown like she was a teacher, and I was late for detention when Officer Reed rolled up, tall, tired. Not the kind of guy you bluff. She rushed him with the folder. He skimmed, frowned, said the dates didn't line up, and he'd never seen an HOA force someone out for a meeting. And that's when Tom Garrison, my neighbor with the yard boots and a mechanic's patience, wandered over and told the officer he'd seen a black SUV the day before. 2 guys measuring my lot, pointing a laser through my windows agate. Unlocked like they had a key, and I pulled out photos of the tracks and the cracked latch and that card, and everything shifted 6 feet to the left because facts have weight. You know what I mean. Then a glossy black SUV slid to the curb, and 3 suits stepped out, with the confidence of people who never hear the word. No lead guy with silver hair and an expensive tan. Stuck out his hand like he was blessing us. "Victor Hale, Horizon Redevelopment here for a scheduled property assessment." And he spoke to Officer Reed like this was all routine. Then angled a thick envelope toward Darla, not me, calling it a consulting honorarium. And the air went thin, and Reed's face turned to granite. "Sir, are you attempting to compensate a community official in connection with accessing private property without consent?" While Darla reached for the lifeline, and Reed stepped between. And then my wife Tessa pulled in like the cavalry with her messy bun, and that look in her eye that says she found the receipts handed. Reed County stamped HOA minutes, showing Darla got voted out months ago. No emergency authority, no special powers, no nothing. And Darla said nothing because there was nothing to say. And Victor took one elegant step back from her, like he'd just realized what he was standing in. Reed asked Darla to call for the original bylaws. She stalled, claimed the office was closed, and she didn't have keys. So we all drove 5 minutes to the community center anyway. And behind that glass door, you could see it all without going inside. Nothing. The office stripped down to air and dust mail stacked like a sad paper tomb. And Reed shaded his eyes and asked, "When did you last have access?" And Darla deflated, admitted. She lost the election, but kept working because people didn't appreciate her vision. Which is wild when you say it out loud. And that night, a text pinged my phone from an unknown number. "Polite as a dentist reminder, Sir Mason. Your interference has been noted. Some problems have permanent solutions. And Tom stood in our kitchen with his arms crossed like he could hold the house together by posture alone, while Tessa called Reed and fraud and anyone else who would listen. Because once someone threatens your family, the light flips on. And it never flips off again. Before sunrise the next morning, I heard the backslider click and ran downstairs. And there he was, Victor, in my yard, like he'd booked it on an app, conferring with two guys who were measuring the fence line and walking off the pool's home. As a cat, waving when he saw me and pointing at his watch. Like we had an appointment, and when Officer Reed came through the gate and told him he was trespassing. Victor smiled and held up a folder, said, "We were finalizing an acquisition, and that Mrs. Quinn had executed a purchase agreement on behalf of the HOA the night before. $50,000 for a house worth 6 times. That market value is subjective," he said. The association had financial obligations, and Tessa, bless her, read him the receipts from the county recorder and the HOA attorney. No filing, no authority, no debts, no emergency anything. And Victor pivoted to the quiet voice you hear in back rooms. "Mason, nobody wants a fight." Held out a second envelope thick enough to feel through the paper for your cooperation. And the frozen part of me melted into a steady anger, the kind that sharpens your words. And I told him to take his fake papers and his envelopes and get off my property before we added charges. He hadn't thought of yet, and he flashed that predator look, flat and bored and dangerous. We have ways of removing obstacles. And Reed didn't raise his voice, he just said, "Turn around, hands behind your back," and clicked the cuffs, while 2 more patrol units boxed in Victor's associates, because Tom, who sees everything, had called backup. The second stranger stepped through my gate, and one of the guys had a gun. He wasn't allowed to carry. The other had a phone with threads that once a judge said, "Go read like a playbook for squeezing neighborhoods just like ours across 3 states." Reed opened Victor's briefcase and pulled out a file that made my skin crawl. Aerial photos of every house on our street, Ho Park, values and notes on the people who lived inside little labels that boiled neighbors down to levers. Vulnerable, motivated heritage resistance, apply financial pressure, and my page stamped like a dare. High resistance, requires special attention, and I wanted to shower in bleach and then start knocking on doors because once you see the machine, you can't unsee it. The emergency HOA meeting packed the community center shoulder to shoulder. Linda Cho, the quiet accountant who became our new board president, banged the gavel like it mattered, and a detective from fraud walked us through the web. Shell companies spinning around the same names, notaries who were always somewhere else, forged violation letters that looked official enough to scare you into paying or selling, and then neighbors stood and told pieces that sounded small until they snapped together like tiles. Grady sold in the spring because Darla warned her of a new accessibility code that would cost $50,000 the young couple who jog at sunrise, drained their savings. Fixing landscaping violations under threat of daily fines. Families who moved after surprise assessments or whispered rezoning notices. And then a projector lit up a site plan for what our block would have become. Big boxes, chain restaurants, a fancy car wash with a lounge, and the room went quiet in that heavy way, where sadness and anger hold hands, and you look around and realize the only reason this worked as long as it did was because we weren't talking to each other. Charges landed like summer hail. Darla cooperated once she saw the stack of evidence with her name on it. Misused funds turned into favors, turned into schemes. and a judge called it what it was, and gave her time, and ordered restitution. And Victor stood in federal court in a Navy suit and pled to a list that read like a business plan written in crime. And yeah, that happened. But the real victory wasn't the headlines. It was what we built after the policy changes and the habits that turned sunlight into a lock, 2 signatures on every check, meetings recorded, and minutes posted in 48 hours. Any official knocking on a door triggers a group text, and 3 neighbors show up with cameras and questions. Tom runs Neighborhood Watch, which is really code for he knows every dog by name and who's supposed to be on which porch. And the best part, the part I didn't see coming, is my backyard, where Victor paced off feet like he was buying a prize pig, is now a garden. Not symbolic, but real dirt and calluses, raised beds built by hands that used to file complaints, peonies for Mrs. Grady because she missed the ones by her old steps, a kid's row where little hands pull tomatoes and bigger kids pretend not to eat strawberries, and a stone corner for the folks who left under pressure and came home when the courts unwound it. And I swear I pretend there's dust in my eye when I walk past, because pride sneaks up on you like that. If this were a movie, we'd fade out on a drone shot over green beds and smiling neighbors. But life doesn't care about neat endings. The texts stopped for a while. Then new ones popped up from different numbers with different grammar, vague and smug. Nothing that stands alone in a courtroom. Everything that tells you people who build schemes don't forget where they lost. And I won't lie. Sometimes. I check the locks twice and peek at the gate latch before bed, then I breathe and remember what broke them. Wasn't my anger or Reed's cuffs or even Tessa's receipts. It was the moment we started talking to each other, the minute the quiet ended. Because predators depend on silence, and communities that act like communities are hard to steal, and that's the truth I keep in my pocket with my keys. So let me ask you straight. Where's the line between improving a neighborhood and steamrolling the people who made it home? Is an HOA a safety net or a weapon, depending on who's holding it? Have you seen a developer or an official lean on fear to get what they want? Drop your take in the comments, argue it out. Tell me what you've lived through and what you wish you'd known sooner. Hit like. If you want more true stories told from the front porch, share this with a neighbor who needs to hear it, and subscribe. If you believe ordinary people deciding not to be quiet is how justice starts.